The fluorescent lights of Morrison's grocery hummed like trapped insects above aisle 12, casting harsh shadows between towers of colorful cereal boxes. Most shoppers moved with the lazy rhythm of routine Tuesday afternoon errands, their carts squeaking against polished linoleum floors. The air carried the mingled scents of fresh bread from the bakery and industrial cleaning solution that never quite masked the underlying staleness of a building that had seen too many years. But in that maze of mundane normalcy, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Officer Ethan Morales adjusted his duty belt as he walked the perimeter with Echo, his German Shepherd partner, whose amber eyes missed nothing. The K9 unit's weekly community patrol through Brookridge's sleepy downtown district usually yielded nothing more dramatic than expired parking meters and the occasional shoplifting complaint. Echo's nose twitched at the familiar cocktail of human scents, processed foods, and cleaning, and chemicals, her paws clicking rhythmically against the floor as they navigated past displays of seasonal items and promotional end caps. Neither officer nor dog expected this routine visit to become the catalyst for something that would forever change how they understood the silent language of desperation. In the cereal aisle, a small figure stood motionless among the brightly colored boxes, clutching a threadbare teddy bear with the desperate intensity of someone holding onto the last piece of solid ground in a crumbling world. The 5-year-old girl's blonde hair hung in unwashed tangles around her pale face, and her pink cotton dress bore the telltale stains of neglect that spoke louder than words ever could. But it was her hand that held the key to everything that would follow, making a gesture so subtle that 99 people out of 100 would have missed it entirely. Echo's body went rigid in the middle of aisle 12, every muscle fiber tensed like a coiled spring ready to release. Her ears snapped forward with military precision, amber eyes laser-focused on something that made Officer Morales's blood run cold when he followed her gaze. The German Shepherd had detected thousands of scents in her 4 years of service, tracked missing persons through dense forests, and identified explosives in crowded venues. But this was different. This was personal. Her hackles didn't rise, her teeth didn't show, but something primal in her canine instincts screamed that the small blonde girl clutching the teddy bear needed immediate protection. The child stood frozen between towers of Cheerios and Lucky Charms, her tiny hand positioned in a way that would appear meaningless to most observers. Palm facing outward, thumb carefully tucked against her fingers, the remaining digits curled in a subtle curve that lasted barely 3 seconds before dropping to her side. Morales felt his training kick in like ice water flooding his veins. He had sat through those mandatory seminars about child distress signals, the ones most officers treated like bureaucratic box-checking exercises. But now, watching this 5-year-old girl make the international gesture for silent help, while a tall man with sleeve tattoos casually browsed cereal boxes beside her, every lecture slide flashed through his memory with crystalline clarity. The man's voice carried the dangerous calm of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question when he placed his hand on the girl's shoulder and said quietly, "Come on, Lily, we need to go." The child's entire body language shifted in that instant, shrinking inward like a flower closing against an approaching storm. Echo's tail had gone completely still, her breathing shallow and controlled, every instinct telling her that whatever was happening in this mundane grocery aisle was about to determine whether a little girl lived or disappeared forever into a nightmare that most people preferred to believe didn't exist in small towns like Brookridge. In the heart of America, where suburban streets stretch like arteries through communities that pride themselves on safety and normalcy, a different kind of hero walks among us on 4 legs. K9 units across the United States represent more than just law enforcement tools. They are living bridges between human intuition and animal instinct, capable of detecting dangers that escape even the most trained human eye. These remarkable partnerships between officers and their canine Companions have saved countless lives, but perhaps none more dramatically than what unfolded in the seemingly peaceful town of Brookridge on one ordinary Tuesday that would prove to be anything but routine. Echo, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a coat the color of burnished copper and eyes that held the intelligence of ancient wolves, had been partnered with Officer Ethan Morales for over 2 years. Together, they patrolled the quiet streets of this small American town where the most exciting calls typically involved noise complaints or minor traffic violations. Brookridge prided itself on being the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children rode bicycles until streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across manicured lawns. The town's population of just over 8,000 residents enjoyed a crime rate so low that the local newspaper often struggled to fill its police blotter with anything more dramatic than reports of missing cats or parking meter violations. But beneath this veneer of suburban tranquility, darker currents flowed like underground streams, invisible to most but not to those trained to recognize the subtle signs of human suffering. Officer Morales had learned through years of service that evil rarely announced itself with dramatic flourishes or obvious warning signs. Instead, it whispered through closed doors, hid behind forced smiles, and manifested in the smallest gestures that most people dismissed as meaningless. Echo, however, possessed abilities that transcended human limitations, her senses finely tuned to detect emotional distress through changes in body chemistry, posture, and the almost imperceptible signals that desperate people unconsciously transmitted when they believed no one was watching. The bond between a K-9 officer and their K-9 partner represents one of law enforcement's most powerful tools, built on trust, communication, and an understanding that sometimes the most important conversations happen without words. This is the story of how that bond saved a life, uncovered a hidden tragedy, and proved that heroes come in all forms, some with badges and some with paws, but all united by an unwavering commitment to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The automatic doors of Morrison's grocery parted with a mechanical whisper as Officer Ethan Morales stepped inside, the blast of air conditioning carrying the familiar medley of scents that defined American retail. Spaces. Echo padded beside him, her claws clicking against polished linoleum that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting overhead, her nose immediately cataloging the complex symphony of smells that humans could barely detect. The store bustled with the lazy energy of mid-afternoon shoppers, mothers pushing carts while checking lists scrawled on smartphone notes, elderly couples debating the merits of different soup brands, teenagers gravitating toward the snack aisles with the magnetic pull of processed sugar and artificial flavoring. This weekly community patrol through Brookridge's commercial district represented the kind of proactive policing that built trust between law enforcement and citizens, Officer Morales engaging in brief conversations with store managers and offering reassuring smiles to children who stared wide-eyed at Echo's imposing presence. The German shepherd moved with practiced professionalism, her amber eyes scanning each aisle they passed, her ears rotating, like satellite dishes picking up frequencies beyond human perception. In aisle 12, surrounded by towers of brightly colored cereal boxes that promised everything from increased energy to improved cognitive function, a small figure stood motionless in a way that defied the natural restlessness of childhood. 5-year-old Lily clutched a threadbare teddy bear with one missing button eye, the stuffed animal's brown fur matted from countless nights of desperate hugging, its remaining features worn smooth by tiny fingers that found comfort in its familiar texture. Her blonde hair hung in unwashed tangles that spoke of neglect rather than mere childhood messiness, and her pink cotton dress bore stains that told stories of meals missed and baths avoided, the fabric clinging to her thin frame like a shroud of sadness. But it was her absolute stillness that first caught Echo's attention. the unnatural way she stood frozen between displays of Lucky Charms and Frosted Flakes, her small body radiating a tension that seemed to vibrate through the air like a tuning fork struck against stone. The tall man beside her browsed cereal options with deliberate casualness, his tattooed arms moving with practiced nonchalance as he examined nutrition labels. But his proximity to the child carried an undercurrent of control that made Echo's hackles begin to rise. When Lily's small hand rose to shoulder height, palm facing outward with thumb carefully tucked against her fingers in a gesture that lasted barely 3 heartbeats, Echo's entire body language shifted into high alert mode, every instinct screaming that this tiny human was broadcasting a desperate plea for help in the only way she dared. Officer Morales felt his pulse spike as his training collided with reality in that fluorescent-lit grocery aisle, the child distress signal recognition protocols flashing through his memory like emergency broadcast warnings. Echo's body language had shifted into something he recognized from explosive detection scenarios. Her muscles coiled with controlled tension while her breathing became shallow and focused. Every fiber of her being locked onto the small blonde girl who had just made the international gesture for silent help. The tattooed man's hand descended onto Lily's shoulder with practiced ease, his fingers curling possessively around her collarbone as his voice carried that dangerous calm of someone accustomed to unquestioning obedience when he murmured, "Come on, Lily, we need to go." The child's response was immediate and heartbreaking, her entire body shrinking inward like a flower closing against an approaching storm, her grip on the threadbare teddy bear tightening until her knuckles turned white against its matted brown fur. Morales felt the weight of his badge, his oath, and every training session about child protection protocols pressing down on him like a physical force as he made the split-second decision that would define everything that followed. His, and moving instinctively to Echo's leash, while his mind calculated distances, exits, and the delicate balance between intervention and observation. The man moved with casual confidence through the checkout line, his demeanor suggesting nothing more suspicious than a guardian completing routine errands. But Echo's hackles remained raised as she tracked their movement with the intensity of a predator watching prey. At the register, the teenage cashier attempted friendly conversation, commenting on Lily's teddy bear with the kind of innocent enthusiasm that made the child's face briefly illuminate before the man's hand pressed against her back and the light died in her eyes like a candle snuffed by cold wind. Morales maintained careful distance while following them through the parking lot, his radio silent in his hand as he weighed the impossible decision between immediate action based on a gesture that might have been meaningless and allowing potential victims to disappear into whatever nightmare waited beyond the grocery store's protective walls. Echo's behavior provided the deciding factor, her tail rigid and head high as she watched the beat-up blue sedan pull away from the parking space, her amber eyes never leaving the vehicle as it merged into afternoon traffic. The German shepherd's posture communicated what her human partner's procedural training could not, that sometimes the most important calls for help came in whispers rather than screams, and that walking away from this moment would haunt them both forever. Morales jogged toward their patrol car with Echo beside him, her practiced leap into the passenger seat, accompanied by the mechanical click of his seatbelt and the rumble of the engine turning over, the radio crackling with routine dispatches that seemed absurdly mundane compared to the gravity of what they had just witnessed in aisle 12. The patrol car hummed through Brookridge's afternoon traffic like a predator stalking its prey, Officer Morales maintaining precise distance behind the beat-up blue sedan, while his mind raced through protocols and procedures that suddenly felt inadequate for the gravity of the situation unfolding before them. Echo sat rigid in the passenger seat, her amber eyes never wavering from the vehicle ahead, her breathing controlled and focused in a way that communicated absolute certainty that the small human inside that car needed their protection. The sedan's exhaust pipe coughed black smoke, into the humid air as it turned onto Maple Street, past houses with manicured lawns and white picket fences that represented the American dream in its most idealized form. The irony not lost on Morales that evil could hide so easily behind facades of normalcy. 3 cars back, he followed the vehicle into Sunset Manor Apartments, a complex that had seen better decades, its beige paint peeling like sunburned skin and its parking lot cracked with weeds pushing through asphalt like nature. Reclaiming abandoned territory. The sedan pulled into a space marked for Unit 2B, and through his windshield Morales watched the tattooed man emerge first, his movements casual but alert, scanning the parking lot with the practiced caution of someone accustomed to being watched. Lily appeared next, her small form dwarfed by the car door as she clutched her threadbare teddy bear, her movements mechanical and subdued as she followed the man toward the stairwell leading to the second floor. Morales parked across the street at a gas station, positioning himself with clear sightlines to the apartment building while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. His notepad balanced on his knee as he recorded license plate numbers, unit information, and detailed observations about the building's layout. Echo remained motionless except for her eyes, which tracked every movement around the complex with laser precision, her nose twitching as she processed scent patterns carried on the afternoon breeze. 10 minutes after they entered Unit 2B, movement appeared at an upstairs window. A brief flutter of broken blinds, revealing a pale slice of face framed by tangled blonde hair, the image lasting only seconds but burning itself into Morales' memory like a photograph. The child pressed against the glass appeared to be looking directly at their patrol car, her expression carrying the desperate hope of someone who had learned not to expect rescue but continued to watch for it. Anyway, Morales reached for his radio, his thumb hovering over the transmit button, while his mind wrestled with the procedural reality that he had no legal justification for intervention based solely on a hand gesture and suspicious behavior. The dispatcher's voice crackled with routine efficiency when he finally made contact, his report carefully worded to document observations without overstepping jurisdictional boundaries. Echo's low growl rumbled through the car's interior when another figure appeared briefly in the window, the man's silhouette blocking Lily from view before the blinds snapped closed with violent finality. Back at Brookridge Police Department, the fluorescent lights hummed over Officer Morales' desk as he stared at grainy body camera footage that might have been meaningless to anyone else, but felt like evidence of a crime he couldn't yet prove. Echo lay curled beneath his chair, her breathing steady, but her ears still twitching at every sound that filtered through the station's walls, as if part of her remained connected to that apartment across town where a small girl waited behind broken blinds. Sergeant Patricia Wells, a 26-year veteran with steel-grey hair and eyes that had seen enough human cruelty to fill several lifetimes, leaned against the doorframe, with arms crossed and an expression that suggested she was weighing possibilities on scales only she could see. The conversation between them carried the weight of institutional protocol crashing against moral imperative. Morales explaining what he had witnessed, while Wells calculated legal ramifications and departmental liability. The hand gesture, captured in a single blurry frame of body camera footage, lasted less than 3 seconds, but represented the foundation of everything that would follow. A child's desperate attempt to communicate across the void of her isolation. Wells pulled up training materials on her computer screen, refreshing her memory about child, distress signals, and the legal framework surrounding interventions based on non-verbal communications, her fingers drumming against the desk as she processed the implications of acting on such minimal evidence. Echo's behavior became part of the equation, her reputation as a reliable detector of human distress, lending credibility to Morales' instincts. But even the most well-trained K-9 couldn't provide testimony that would hold up in court. The afternoon stretched into evening as they researched precedents, and consulted with child protective services, building a case file that existed more in potential than in concrete evidence. Maria's diner became an unexpected source of intelligence when Morales stopped for coffee and overheard two local women discussing a quiet blonde girl they had seen at the laundromat, their concern evident as they described a child who sat motionless while her guardian ignored her completely. These casual observations from community members began forming a pattern that transformed isolated incidents into a mosaic of neglect and control, each piece of information adding weight to the growing suspicion that Lily's situation demanded immediate attention. The investigation expanded beyond official channels as Morales contacted Vanessa Reyes, a social worker whose reputation for protecting children had made her a trusted ally in cases where bureaucracy moved too slowly for vulnerable lives. Her experience with trauma victims provided insights that police training couldn't match. Her ability to read the subtle signs of psychological distress in children, making her an invaluable partner in unraveling whatever was happening in apartment 2B. The evidence locker at the police station received new additions as Morales documented every fragment of information, from witness statements to photographic evidence of the apartment complex, building a case that might convince a judge to authorize more direct intervention. Echo's presence during these late-night planning sessions provided a constant reminder of the stakes involved, her occasional whimpers and restless pacing suggesting that her canine intuition remained convinced that time was running out for the little girl they had encountered in the cereal aisle. Dawn broke grey and cold over Brookridge as Officer Morales clipped Echo's service vest with hands that betrayed none of the tension coiling in his chest like a spring under pressure. The German Shepherd's amber eyes held that familiar intensity that preceded high-stakes operations, her body language communicating readiness for whatever awaited them at Sunset Manor Apartments. Sergeant Wells sat in the passenger seat of the unmarked cruiser, her steel grey hair pulled back in a regulation bun that matched her no-nonsense expression, while Vanessa Reyes occupied the back seat with a clipboard full of legal documentation that would either save a child or reveal the tragic inadequacy of a system designed to protect the vulnerable. The apartment complex looked different in morning light, its beige paint appearing more faded and its structural deterioration more obvious, as if daylight stripped away whatever meager dignity darkness had provided. Unit 2B's blue door bore the scars of too many years and too many secrets, its paint chipped around the edges like old wounds that had never properly healed. Echo's nostrils flared as they climbed the concrete stairs, processing scent signatures that painted invisible pictures of fear, desperation, and something darker that made her hackles rise despite her professional training. The knock echoed through the hallway with official authority, Wells's voice carrying the weight of badge and law when she announced their presence and purpose, the words hanging in stale air that smelled of industrial disinfectant and human misery. The silence that followed stretched like a held breath until footsteps approached from inside the apartment, hesitant and unsteady, accompanied by the metallic scraping of multiple locks being disengaged. The door opened to reveal Dante Briggs looking older than his 30-something years, his tattooed arms crossed defensively, while his eyes darted between the three visitors with the nervous energy of someone whose secrets were pressing against the surface like poison seeking release. His explanation came in fragments punctuated by uncomfortable pauses, describing himself as a temporary guardian for a friend's or child, while her mother dealt with unspecified problems that required her absence from town. Echo positioned herself strategically in the narrow hallway, her presence both calming and intimidating as she observed everything with the trained eye of a professional who understood that the most important information often came through non-verbal channels. The apartment's interior told its own story through absence rather than presence. the lack of children's toys, bright colors, or any indication that a 5-year-old lived within these walls, speaking louder than any spoken testimony. When Vanessa Reyes asked to see Lily, the man's resistance manifested in body language that Echo read like an open book. His protective stance over the closed bedroom door, communicating volumes about power dynamics and control that existed within this space. The social worker's gentle persistence finally opened that door to reveal a small figure sitting cross-legged on a faded rug, clutching the same threadbare teddy bear that had witnessed her silent cry for help in the grocery store aisle. Lily's whispered conversation with Vanessa filtered through the apartment like smoke, carrying fragments of truth about missed meals, irregular sleep, and the kind of profound loneliness that settled into a child's bones when the adults responsible for their care were either absent or inadequate to the task of providing basic human connection and security. The revelation that Lily's mother had vanished into the shadowy underworld of domestic violence shelters transformed the investigation from a child welfare case into a desperate search for a woman who might already be dead. Vanessa Reyes worked her phone with the persistence of someone who understood that bureaucratic delays could mean the difference between reunion and tragedy. Her contacts in the statewide shelter network providing fragments of information that slowly coalesced into a picture of terror and desperate flight. Echo remained close to Officer Morales throughout the long hours of phone calls and database searches, her presence a calming constant in the chaos of an investigation that seemed to spawn new questions with every answer they uncovered. The name Tasha Monroe appeared in no local school records, no pediatric medical files, no official documentation that would confirm Lily's existence in any government database, as if mother and child had been deliberately erased from the systems designed to protect them. Dante Briggs's story began to unravel under the weight of inconsistencies and timeline discrepancies. His claim that Lily's mother would return any day now, losing credibility as social services discovered that his temporary guardianship had stretched far beyond any reasonable definition of emergency childcare. The apartment complex's security cameras had been broken for months, eliminating any hope of visual confirmation about when Tasha Monroe had last been seen or under what circumstances she had left her daughter in the care of someone who clearly lacked the emotional resources or legal authority to provide adequate care. Echo's behavior during interviews with Dante provided additional evidence of the complex dynamics at play, her calm acceptance of his presence suggesting that he posed no immediate physical threat to Lily, while her continued alertness indicated that the situation remained far from resolved. The breakthrough came through the network of domestic violence advocates who operated like an underground railroad for women fleeing abusive relationships, their careful documentation and communication systems designed to track survivors without leaving digital footprints that could be exploited by vengeful partners. Tasha Monroe had indeed fled Brookridge in the middle of the night, leaving behind everything except the hope that distance might provide the safety that law enforcement had failed to guarantee. The shelter in Riverside County confirmed her presence under an assumed name, her physical condition upon arrival consistent with someone who had endured prolonged psychological and physical abuse, her mental state fragile but determined to rebuild a life that her daughter could safely share. The reunion planning required delicate coordination between multiple agencies and jurisdictions, each entity protecting their piece of information while working toward the common goal of restoring a family that domestic violence had torn apart. Echo accompanied Morales on the drive to Riverside County, her calm presence in the back seat providing reassurance during a journey that would either end in triumph or devastating confirmation that some damage could never be fully repaired. The shelter's sterile corridors echoed with the footsteps of women and children who had traded familiar comfort for unfamiliar safety, their faces bearing the particular exhaustion of people who had survived experiences that most others could never imagine. The controlled environment of the Ainz Riverside County Shelter's family meeting room carried the sterile scent of industrial cleaning supplies mixed with the lingering aroma of coffee and anxiety, fluorescent lighting casting everything in the harsh glow of institutional efficiency. Echo positioned herself strategically near the door, her amber eyes tracking every movement while her body language remained calm and professional, understanding instinctively that this moment required delicate handling of emotions that had been stretched beyond their breaking point. Tasha Monroe sat in a plastic chair that had seen too many tearful reunions and devastating separations, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that revealed the sharp angles of a face carved thin by weeks of inadequate nutrition and chronic stress. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her borrowed clothing, second-hand garments that represented dignity salvaged from the wreckage of a life torn apart by domestic violence. When the door opened to admit Lily, clutching her threadbare teddy bear, time seemed to compress into a single heartbeat that contained months of separation, fear, and desperate hope. The 5-year-old's eyes locked onto her mother's face with the intensity of someone confirming that dreams could indeed manifest in reality, her small feet carrying her across the linoleum floor with careful steps that spoke of learned caution around emotional moments that might disappear like mirages. Echo watched the reunion with the professional detachment of a trained observer, while her canine heart responded to the pure joy radiating from both mother and child, their embrace lasting long enough to begin healing wounds that had been festering in the darkness of separation. Vanessa Reyes documented the interaction with clinical precision, noting the immediate bond between mother and daughter while simultaneously assessing Tasha's mental state and capacity for providing stable care. The social worker's questions probed gently into practical matters of housing, employment, and support systems, building the foundation for a reunification plan that would satisfy legal requirements while acknowledging the complex realities of starting over with nothing but determination and love. Officer Morales observed from the background, his uniform representing both the authority that had enabled this moment and the system that had initially failed to protect this family from the violence that had torn them apart. Echo's calm presence seemed to provide comfort to both Lily and Tasha, the dog's steady breathing and gentle demeanor offering a bridge between the trauma of the past and the uncertain promise of the future. The reunion planning session stretched across hours of paperwork and coordination between agencies, each form and signature representing another step toward rebuilding a life that domestic violence had nearly destroyed completely. Lily's whispered conversation with her mother filled the gaps in a story that official reports could never fully capture. Her small voice describing weeks of confusion, loneliness, and the kind of existential fear that settled into a child's bones when the fundamental security of parental presence vanished without explanation. Tasha's tears came in waves that seemed to originate from depths of guilt and relief that threatened to overwhelm her fragile emotional equilibrium. Her whispered apologies to her daughter, carrying the weight of maternal responsibility that had been forced into impossible choices by circumstances beyond her control. The afternoon sun, streaming through reinforced windows, illuminated a scene of healing that would require months or years to fully unfold. The first tentative steps toward recovery beginning with the simple act of mother and child sharing the same space without fear of discovery by those who had driven them into hiding. 3 weeks after Lily's reunion with her mother, the rhythms of Brookridge had settled back into the comfortable predictability that small-town residents cherished. But Officer Morales found himself viewing familiar streets through different eyes, his awareness heightened to the subtle signs of distress that had previously passed unnoticed in the background noise of daily patrol duties. Echo maintained her professional composure during routine calls, but her alertness had sharpened in ways that suggested their shared experience in aisle 12 had fundamentally altered how she processed human interactions and emotional distress signals. The morning sun cast long shadows across the elementary school playground as yellow buses discharged their precious cargo of backpack-laden children, their voices creating a symphony of excitement and anticipation that marked the beginning of another school day in America's heartland. Echo's ears perked as they drove past Brookridge Elementary's chain-link fence, her amber eyes scanning the crowd of children with the same intensity she had once reserved for detecting explosives or tracking missing persons. Near the far corner of the playground, partially hidden behind the jungle gym's metal framework, a small figure stood alone, with posture that immediately triggered recognition in both officer and canine partner. The 6-year-old girl pressed her face against the fence with the desperate intensity of someone watching salvation pass just beyond reach, her small hand rising to shoulder height in a gesture that made Morales's blood run cold with the terrible familiarity of déjà vu. Echo's response was immediate and unmistakable, her body tensing into the same alert configuration that had saved Lily's life, every muscle fiber communicating absolute certainty that they were witnessing another silent cry for help from a child who had learned that speaking could be dangerous. The girl's navy blue jacket hung loose on her thin frame, and her pink backpack clutched against her chest like armor against a world that had already taught her too much about fear and the need for protective gestures. Morales pulled the patrol car to the curb with practiced calm, while his mind raced through protocols and procedures, the weight of institutional responsibility balanced against the moral imperative that had driven their previous intervention. Echo's low whine carried undertones of urgency that transcended species barriers, her canine instincts recognizing patterns of human distress that formal training could never fully capture or quantify. The school's administrative staff responded to their inquiry with professional cooperation tinged by concern, their records showing that Aria Milan had been experiencing irregular attendance and unexplained absences that painted a troubling picture when combined with the physical evidence of her desperate signal. The girl's mother had failed to appear for scheduled pickup 3 times in the past 2 weeks, leaving her daughter waiting behind chain-link barriers while other children disappeared into the safety of family vehicles and familiar routines. Echo's behavior during their brief interaction with Aria provided additional confirmation that the pattern they had first recognized in a grocery store cereal aisle was repeating itself with terrifying consistency, suggesting that somewhere in Brookridge's seemingly peaceful community, other children might be broadcasting similar signals of distress that went unnoticed by adults who lacked the training to recognize them. The realization that Lily's case might represent just the visible tip of a much larger problem settled over Morales like a heavy blanket, the implications stretching far beyond individual rescue missions into systemic questions about how many silent cries for help went unanswered in communities that prided themselves on safety and neighborly care. The investigation into Aria Milan's circumstances unveiled connections that stretched far beyond individual cases of neglect, revealing a network of vulnerable children whose silent distress signals had been broadcasting through Brookridge's community for months, without adequate recognition or response from the systems designed to protect them. Echo's heightened sensitivity to childhood trauma markers led to the discovery of 3 additional cases within a 6-block radius of the elementary school, each involving children whose behavioral patterns suggested environments where fear had replaced security as the dominant emotional framework. Officer Morales found himself partnering with an expanding team of social workers, school counselors, and child psychologists who recognized that addressing individual rescue scenarios required understanding the broader social dynamics that allowed such situations to persist undetected in communities that prided themselves on family values and neighborly awareness. The pattern analysis revealed disturbing trends in how economic stress, social isolation, and inadequate support systems combined to create conditions where children became invisible casualties of adult failures, their desperate communications dismissed as behavioral problems rather than recognized as appeals for intervention. ECHO's training evolved to include specialized protocols for detecting the subtle physiological changes that accompanied chronic stress in children. Her natural abilities enhanced through systematic exposure to case studies and controlled interactions with trauma survivors who helped refine her recognition of distress markers. The police department's community outreach programs expanded to include educational sessions about recognizing child distress signals. Officer Morales and ECHO presenting workshops to teachers, store clerks, and ordinary citizens who might encounter children attempting to communicate their need for help through non-verbal means. The grocery store, where Lily had first made her silent plea, became a training ground for staff education. Management implementing protocols that empowered employees to recognize and respond appropriately to signs of child distress without overstepping legal boundaries or creating additional trauma for vulnerable families. ECHO's reputation as a specialist in child protection cases spread throughout the regional law enforcement network, leading to consultation requests from other departments dealing with similar situations where traditional investigative methods had failed to penetrate the silence surrounding endangered children. The collaboration between human intuition and canine instinct that had saved Lily's life became a model for other canine units, training programs incorporating lessons about the unique bond between dogs and traumatized children who often found it easier to trust animals than the adults who had failed to protect them. Vanessa Reyes documented the emerging patterns in case studies that would eventually influence policy changes at the state level, her research demonstrating how community-based interventions supported by specially trained canine teams could identify and address child endangerment situations before they escalated into tragic outcomes. The success stories began accumulating alongside the heartbreaking discoveries, each rescued child representing both a triumph of the system working as intended and a sobering reminder of how many others might still be waiting behind closed doors for someone to notice their carefully crafted signals of desperation. The network of foster families, therapeutic support services, and legal advocates that had facilitated Lily's recovery became a template for rapid response protocols that could stabilize children removed from dangerous situations, while permanent solutions were developed through collaborative case management approaches. The transformation of Brookridge's community response to child endangerment became a testament to how individual acts of courage could ripple outward to create systemic change. ECHO's initial recognition of Lily's distress signal evolving into a comprehensive network of protection that extended far beyond the boundaries of a single police jurisdiction. Officer Morales found himself traveling to conferences and training seminars across the country, sharing the story of how one German shepherd's instincts had revealed gaps in traditional child protection protocols that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The methodical documentation of their cases provided researchers with quantifiable evidence about the effectiveness of canine units in detecting psychological distress, leading to grants and funding for specialized training programs that would replicate their success in other communities struggling with hidden child endangerment issues. ECHO's reputation as a pioneer in child protection work attracted attention from national media outlets, but Officer Morales carefully controlled her exposure to publicity, understanding that their most important work happened in quiet moments when traumatized children needed to feel safe rather than scrutinized by cameras and reporters seeking dramatic narratives. The apartment complex where they had first found Lily underwent renovations funded by community donations, transforming from a place where vulnerable families hid from their problems into transitional housing that provided support services and stability for women and children escaping dangerous situations. Dante Briggs, the man who had cared for Lily during her mother's absence, completed his certification as a licensed childcare worker and became an advocate for men who found themselves unexpectedly responsible for protecting children from systems that had failed their families. The grocery store's training program for recognizing child distress signals became a model that was adopted by retail chains across the region, creating a network of trained observers who understood that customer service sometimes meant recognizing when someone needed help. That went far beyond assistance with shopping. Echo's partnership with Officer Morales evolved beyond law enforcement into therapeutic support work. Their presence at crisis intervention centers and family court proceedings, providing comfort to children who found it difficult to trust human adults, but could form immediate bonds with a dog who seemed to understand their unspoken fears and anxieties. The success statistics were impressive, but told only part of the story, the real measure of their impact visible in the faces of children who had learned to make eye contact again, to speak up when they felt unsafe, and to believe that their voices mattered in a world that had previously taught them the opposite lessons. Training academies began incorporating lessons about the unique communication methods that traumatized children use to signal distress, teaching new officers and social workers to recognize the subtle signs that Echo had detected instinctively through her evolved sensitivity to human emotional states. The collaborative approach between law enforcement, social services, and K-9 units created a new standard for child protection work that emphasized prevention through community awareness rather than reactive responses to situations that had already escalated beyond the point where intervention could prevent lasting damage. Echo's aging process became a source of concern for Officer Morales, who understood that their partnership represented more than just professional collaboration, but a unique bond that had enabled them to save lives in ways that traditional police work could never have accomplished alone. Behind every documented success story lay dozens of quieter interventions that never made headlines but represented the daily reality of K-9 units trained to recognize human distress in its most subtle manifestations. Echo's sensitivity to childhood trauma extended beyond dramatic rescues to include seemingly routine encounters that revealed the pervasive nature of family dysfunction hiding beneath suburban normalcy. At a shopping mall in the neighboring county, Echo's alert behavior during a routine security patrol led to the discovery of a teenage girl who had been living in her car for 3 weeks after aging out of foster care with no transition support or permanent housing options. The interaction began when Echo refused to move past a bench where the girl sat reading a library book, her persistent attention to the teenager's emotional state eventually prompting a conversation that connected her with emergency housing and job placement services. During a school assembly about safety awareness, Echo identified a 10-year-old boy whose chronic anxiety about speaking in class stemmed from verbal abuse at home, his learned silence serving as protection against triggering his stepfather's violent outbursts. The revelation came through Echo's gentle approach to a child who flinched at sudden movements and spoke in whispers that barely carried across the gymnasium's acoustics. A routine traffic stop escalated into child protective intervention when Echo detected distress signals from a toddler strapped into a car seat. The investigation revealing that the child's mother had been diluting formula to make limited food assistance stretch further, her desperate attempts to feed her daughter resulting in malnutrition that threatened developmental delays. The case files accumulated in locked cabinets at the police station, each folder containing evidence of Echo's ability to perceive suffering that existed below the threshold of human awareness. her instincts bridging the gap between official protocols and the messy reality of families struggling with poverty, addiction, and intergenerational trauma. Officer Morales documented patterns in Echo's responses that suggested certain environmental factors triggered her protective instincts more reliably than others, leading to the development of predictive models that helped other K9 teams focus their attention on situations with higher probability of containing hidden child endangerment. The apartment complex where Lily had been discovered became a regular patrol location, Echo's presence serving as both deterrent to potential abusers and comfort to children who recognized her as someone who had listened when others could not hear their silent appeals for help. A grocery store clerk reported that children began approaching Echo deliberately. During community patrol visits, their behavior suggesting that word had spread through informal networks about the police dog who understood secrets that adults missed or ignored. The phenomenon of children gravitating toward Echo in public spaces revealed how quickly vulnerable populations could identify sources of genuine protection, their survival instincts recognizing safety in ways that transcended species boundaries and formal training protocols. Emergency room visits occasionally included requests for Echo's presence when medical staff encountered children whose injuries or behavior patterns suggested abuse, but who remained too traumatized to speak about their experiences with adult authority figures. The collaboration between medical professionals and K9 units opened new avenues for therapeutic intervention, Echo's calm presence, often enabling disclosures that traditional interview techniques could not achieve through conventional rapport-building methods. In the end, the most powerful voices often speak without making a sound, their messages transmitted through gestures so subtle that only those trained to listen with more than their ears can intercept the desperate communications that travel through spaces where words have become dangerous luxuries that vulnerable people cannot afford to use. Echo's retirement ceremony took place on a crisp October morning when the leaves had turned the colors of fire and gold, the police department's parking lot filled with representatives from agencies whose work had been transformed by her pioneering contributions to child protection protocols. Officer Morales stood beside his partner as she received recognition for service that transcended the traditional boundaries of law enforcement, her amber eyes calm and steady as cameras captured images that would eventually hang in training academies across the country. The speech delivered by the police chief emphasized statistics and policy changes, but failed to capture the essence of what made Echo's work truly revolutionary, the way she had bridged the gap between human systems and animal instinct to create something entirely new in the field of child protection and community safety. Lily, now 7 years old and thriving in a stable home environment, presented Echo with a hand-drawn portrait that depicted the German Shepherd as a guardian angel with wings spanning across a grocery store aisle where small figures reached up towards safety. The artwork would join others in Officer Morales's collection of tributes from children whose lives had been altered by Echo's ability to hear silence and respond to signals that adults had learned to ignore or dismiss as insignificant behavioral quirks. The legacy extended beyond individual success stories to encompass fundamental changes in how communities approach child welfare, training programs that taught ordinary citizens to recognize distress signals, and legislative reforms that expanded the definition of admissible evidence in child protection cases. Echo's influence rippled through social service agencies that had redesigned their intervention protocols based on lessons learned from cases where traditional methods had failed to penetrate the protective silence that traumatized children wrapped around themselves like invisible armor. The question that lingered in the aftermath of Echo's active service career centered on whether other communities possessed the wisdom and resources necessary to replicate her unique combination of natural ability and specialized training. Officer Morales continued working with younger K-9 teams, sharing knowledge that could be taught alongside instincts that seemed to emerge from deeper sources than formal education could access. The apartment where Lily had waited behind broken blinds now housed a different family, their children playing in the courtyard, where Echo had once detected the scent of fear and desperation that permeated walls, like smoke from fires that burned in rooms where outsiders were not welcome. Somewhere in America's suburban neighborhoods and urban apartment complexes, other children practiced the same silent gestures that saved Lily's life, their small hands forming shapes that carry messages of hope disguised as resignation. The tragedy lies not in the existence of these hidden communications, but in how many pass unnoticed by adults who have forgotten how to see what children cannot safely say, their cries for help dissolving into the background noise of communities that pride themselves on safety while missing the evidence of danger that walks among them, wearing familiar faces and speaking in calm voices that disguise the violence lurking behind closed doors.